Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the Cabarrus County Schools Board of Education regularly scheduled work session for January the 7th. First off, I want to say Happy New Year to everybody and glad you could view in with us tonight. I'd like to call the meeting to order at this time, and the first order of business is that we need to adopt the agenda. Do I have a motion from board members that we approve the agenda as presented? I have a motion. Carolyn, second. Rob, Dave. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Okay, the agenda's approved. Okay, board members, we have a little unusual agenda tonight, as you noticed. And item 3 is all of us remember what happened on December the 14th. The tragic events that took place on December the 14th, 2012 will forever be etched in our minds. Anytime school children and school staff are killed, it dampens one's spirit and brings us all great sorrow. But one might ask themselves, how could this be? Or why our school? Or why Newtown? Or why my child? Or why my teacher? Or my daughter? Or my wife? The answer to these questions are unknown. All that we do know is it did happen, and 28 lives were taken and are no longer with us. The smiles and the laughs, the dreams, the sound of tiny footsteps running in the halls of their school and at their individual homes have been silenced forever. So we ask ourselves, what can we do? We can pay tribute to them by remembering them and making sure that we do all that we can do to prevent this from happening ever again. I'd like to ask for all of you to join me as we stand in remembrance of the Sandy Hook Elementary School victims. Charlotte Bacon. Daniel Barden. Rachel D'Avino.
Olivia Engel. Josephine Gay. Anna Marquez Green. Dylan Hockley.
Dawn Hotchsprung. Madeline Hugh. Catherine Hubbard. Chase Kowalski.
Jesse Lewis. James Matatoli. Grace McDonald. Anne Marie Murphy.
Emily Parker. Jack Pinto. Noah Posner. Caroline Praviti.
Jessica Ricos. Abiel Richmond. Laura Russo. Mary Sherlock.
Victoria Soto. Benjamin Wheeler. Allison Wyatt. Nancy Lanza.
Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Thank all of you. Board members, we're going to move right on into our report section. The first report will be the QSCB financial update. I'd like to ask Ms. Klutz to the podium, please.
Good evening. I'm pleased to bring to you that there are very little changes to the report this evening, and I'll entertain any questions that you've had. I think you've had an opportunity to have the report prior to today. Are there any questions on the report? There's very little activity.
Okay, board members, do you have any questions? If you do, let me know. Otherwise, we'll move right on. If there's a question, let me know, and then I'll cue you up. Okay, Ms. Klutz, thank you for your report. Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Okay, board members, we'll just continue right on with the report section. The next report is 4.2. It's the QBS project status. Mr. Whitkey's at the podium, and he's ready. Likewise, when he finishes, if you have questions, if you'll just let me know, then I'll cue you up so we can move on for the next report. Thank you, Mr. Whitkey.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The projects, as you can see from the report, are moving along very well. One of the things that we've tried to do is update the report, and you'll see a lot of 99 percentiles listed behind some of the projects. In effect, that represents projects that are, for all intents and purposes, the construction is completed. We have, for the most part, finished all of the punch list items, and we're simply waiting for closeout documents, such as O&M manuals and final documents from the design firms. Working with Kelly Klutz's office and her staff, we have begun a very strong push on the consultants to get all this paperwork in. And as an example, all of the IT project information has now been submitted to our office. The consultant involved will be reviewing those documents this week. He has one more project, which is the Weinkauf School, which started a little bit later than the others, and that project will be they will do a walkthrough and a punch list on that project this week as well. So as soon as as he signs off on the documents, he will be giving us a letter stating that, in his professional opinion, the projects are 100% complete, all documents are in, and then I in turn can send a letter to DPI indicating the same. So that will officially close the project, and any monies will be reverted to the general QSCB project monies, and we will move on. There are some projects that are obviously still under construction. We have begun construction of the gymnasium at Northwest High School and working on specifically on the new addition. We've gotten the bid documents for the Jan Freeze a continuation of roof replacement work at that school, so we're reviewing those documents, hope to have those out in the next couple of weeks for bid. And then we are also beginning to work with our design teams to negotiate contracts for the projects that were in a postponed portion of the list, and that would be the Colton Webb Elementary kitchen hood replacement, the Mount Pleasant High School boiler replacement, the weight room and vocational building modifications at Concord High School, and the practice fields that will serve Northwest High School, Northwest Middle School, and Boger Elementary.
Ms. Carpenter.
Yes, I just have one question. One thing that looks really odd is the Concord High weight room and vocation building paid out to date $19. I mean, that just strikes me odd. I mean, it's got the project and everything. What do we pay $19 for? I mean, that amount. I mean, that just looks odd, that amount.
It might have been printing costs. It may have been a.
We are doing something on that one.
Yes,
I mean, that
yes,
is one that we're doing, yeah. But that just looks so odd that amount and what we've got. But we are working on that one,
yes,
correct?
Yes,
okay. All right. Thank you.
You're welcome, ma'am.
Mr. Harrison, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Wiki, for all your great work. We received an email I suppose yesterday, from some parents concerning a tennis court at, I believe, Concord High School. Is that correct? I just want to know if that is already in this list or will be added to this list in the near future, or if it's the type of physical upgrade that belongs on this type of listing that you bring to us?
Normally, it isn't. In this case, it's a little unique because these are one-time funds, if you will, that we're receiving from the county. So we will be developing a report, not unlike what you see for this, most likely. And I'm not sure, we haven't really been told by the county if they want to see it on a monthly basis or a quarterly basis. But we will have those, because they're different funds than the QSCB monies. We will most likely have a separate list.
So that type of upgrade or improvement does not necessarily fall within this type of listing.
That's correct.
I understand, but we will take care of it
In
on a separate, in a separate discussion.
Yes, sir.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Any other questions from the board? Mr. Shoemaker?
It's just more of a housekeeping. On the CFCs that you submit to DPI, then I would expect that we would see these disappear from this report as of the next meeting or next time we get this submitted. So those
Yes.
will be like removed from it. The project on the chiller and cooling tower at Concord High, it showed that you completed the project 4/18, April 18th of 2012. What seems to be its, why haven't we sent the CFC to DPI on that one? Or do you know? Because when I start seeing projects that are hanging out there for 6 months or more, then I'm kind of wondering why we're not getting them off. Because it just makes this report very cumbersome when we have so many 90-some% on there. And
Right. I think that has to do more with the, we've had some problems with the controls portion of that work, and it may be tied to that. I'll check. I believe that there was a lot of testing and balancing issues because of the age of the building, and for some reason it had been problematic even through the summer and early fall semester, getting the transition going from air conditioning into the heating modes at that school. That seemed to be our most problematic
so
school.
these are
for
kind of
us.
like warranty issues
Yes.
associated with it.
Yeah. And we were also waiting for the T&M materials, but, I'm sorry, the O&M materials, and we have gotten those recently, so.
Okay. All right, that's all I had.
Thank you, Mr. Shoemaker. Mr.
I've
Cobb?
got one quick one, and I apologize, I should have asked you this earlier and had you more prepared, so if you can't answer this, I can wait till next week. But do you have an update on the Air Army National Guard and progress with working with them or setting that up?
We had to run, we weren't aware of this, but we had to run an ad that basically told the community that that's what we were doing. So we've run that ad pretty much throughout the holiday season for a couple of weeks per the requirements, per the National Guard's requirements. We've done that, so now we're pretty ready to submit. I think we are gathering documents. I believe everything is in place to submit now, so you're welcome.
Any other questions? Okay, Mr. Phillips?
But I had a question on the Northwest Gym project. I know the schedule there, the window you were looking at was very tight, and I'm just wondering, now that the contractors started to look into the project more, are they still confident that they can deliver the project within that tight window?
Yeah, the meeting we had with them, they didn't offer any concerns at that point, but I'll ask. Okay, yeah, we have not had any reaction. Probably the most important thing is, once athletics are over with for the winter and early spring session, that'll be the special date, because they really need to get in the building and start working, so.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Mr. Phillips. Mr. Wiki, I told you earlier that I had a couple of questions that I wanted to ask you. I finally thought of them.
Very good.
Number one was the dining room equipment at Concord. It's scheduled to be in the middle of December. Did we get phase one in?
Yes, sir.
Okay,
Yes,
we've
yeah.
got that done. All right, and so now we're waiting for the phase two to come in sometime this month.
Yes,
And that'll
towards,
and that'll finish all of that for the dining room equipment.
yes, sir.
Chairs and all. All right, and the other thing, it sort of carries piggyback to what Mr. Shoemaker said about the ones that's pending the COCs and 99%, 97%, and so forth. Can you give us an anticipated date as to when those things will be cleared 100% and we can move on without having to look at where we are on those things? Can you give us an estimated date?
I'm certainly hoping within the next 30 days, 30 to 45 days, we can get all
Yeah.
that cleaned up. And
So surely by March, we'll have just a very few little things on here, like the gym and,
Yes.
and maybe, even the central Cabarrus, the vault and all that should be done by then too, really,
Yes,
maybe.
that's correct.
Yeah, so we should get narrowed down just to just 3 or 4 items at the most by then.
Mhm.
Okay.
That is one
Well,
project I
I'm
forgot
sure
to
glad
mention.
to see this stuff come to an end, folks. I'm here to tell you, and I see Ms. Klutz, our finance director, nod, so she's happy too.
Yes.
So
Yeah.
anyway, thank you, Mr. Wiki, for all your hard work.
Mr.
I sure
Chair.
appreciate it. Any other questions from the board?
Mr. Chair, I'm sorry.
Yes, Mr.
I
Harrison.
apologize. I'll try to get my questions lined up, queued up better as I grow and learn in this process. The proposed projects to be reinstated, priority order, each is at 5%. Generally, what are the criteria for these priorities? Is it cost? Is it the age of the building? Is it a safety issue? What criteria is used to prioritize really any project? But again, very high level and very general. I know it would vary for the different needs.
Generally, we look at life safety and code compliance first and foremost. Second would normally come like the exterior of the building, making sure that we have a watertight enclosure and weather-tight enclosure for students and teachers to be in. And then it sort of goes down there in terms of making sure that we can maintain heat and cooling in the building, environmentally maintain the spaces. And next out would probably be general wellness or general maintenance of the building so that it's usable in all cases. And finally, we get more towards the exterior needs and ultimately the grounds needs of the institutions. So we sort of work, that certainly the code and life safety is key. Then we look at the enclosure, making certain that the water tightness, usability of the building, environment, and so forth, and then the grounds. And that's in a very broad stroke statement. So.
Thank you.
Okay, Mr. Harrison, you good now? Everything good? Okay, everybody else clear? Thank you, Mr. Wiki.
Thank you, sir.
All right, we'll invite our next speaker up. That would be Jason Van Hukelum to give us the magnet program update. And Jason, we're ready whenever you get ready.
Chairman, members of the board, wanted to give you a magnet update for 2013 as the magnet application window opened 1st of January. You have a PowerPoint there in front of you. Want to take some time to just go over a little bit some of the historical context for magnets, and so kind of talk through a little bit what are magnets, why do we do them here in Cabarrus County, what's been our approach, et cetera, and where we're going with them. So a magnet is exactly what the name implies. It's an attempt to draw students from outside of the traditional attendance zone of a particular school using a theme or a particular pedagogical method within the teaching. We do 3 different kinds of magnet approaches here in Cabarrus County, and so let me talk through those real quickly with you. We use a 50-50 approach, which we use at Coulter and Webb, and a 50-50 approach means that 50% of those students come from the neighborhood surrounding that school, and 50% of those students come from outside of that attendance boundary. Okay, but the entire school is a magnet. The entire school uses the theme. In this case, it's STEM. Nothing varies from class to class, but 50% are inside the attendance zone and 50% are outside. Second approach we use at Jan Freeze, Early College, and PLC is a whole school approach where the entire school is a magnet. There's no attendance zone for these schools. They don't have a physical attendance zone outside of just our entire county. And so students can literally come from anywhere in the county to those 3 particular schools. And the last approach that we use is a school within a school, very similar to the 50-50 approach in that there is an attendance boundary for some students, but some of the students are drawn to that school from outside the attendance zone. Those are at Concord High School and Central Cabarrus High School. A key difference, though, is that the students who come to those schools for the magnet are isolated in the sense of their curriculum, not physically isolated. but the entire school is not a magnet. The entire school does not employ that approach. So at Concord High School, we have an IB magnet, but the entire school does not participate in IB. Same with at Central High School, they have a STEM magnet, but the entire school does not participate in STEM. Here's some classic reasons of why we embarked on the journey of magnets. Research would tell us that choice and magnets create energy, build community, and give a real strong identity to a school community. Inevitably, the theme that is chosen for a magnet is used to create relevancy for the learning of students, and all of the disciplines and all the subject areas that are taught in these schools are taught through a particular lens that touches the magnet, that is tightly linked curriculum-wise to the theme of that particular magnet. Obviously, it's a response to the increase in choice that we experience in Cabarrus County through homeschools, charter schools, and private schools, and it's an attempt for the public school system to offer an array of choices to the community and keep families involved in public education. And it is also there to cultivate innovative educational practices that can be scaled up. And those are some of the conversations we have regularly where we see innovative teaching practices that can be used in any classroom in Cabarrus County, not just Culture and Web, not just the IB school. If you can go back one slide, I do want to highlight something that's not in the PowerPoint that you'll see under that third bullet in response to competition. Cabarrus County has a lot to be proud of in the sense of being a school of choice for families in Cabarrus County schools. I just want to highlight some statistics for you. Currently, when you look at charter school enrollment around the state of North Carolina, we have a report that comes out annually that tells us how many students that live in Cabarrus County have chosen to go to a charter school, have chosen to leave the public school and go to a charter school. Our percentage is 1.4%. Okay, so 1.4% of our students that could be attending a Cabarrus County school have chosen to leave our school system and go to a charter school. And let me give you some comparatives there. Gaston County is at 4.7%. Lincoln County is at 6.4%. Charlotte-Mecklenburg is at 5.6%. Union County is at 3.6%. And Iredell is at 5.7%. When you look across the state, Cabarrus County has one of the lowest rates of students participating in charter schools, and that does signify to some extent that our families are very happy with the schools in Cabarrus County. So it's something to be proud of. You as a board can be proud of. Magnets don't come without their challenge. You want to jump in, or you want to wait?
Well, we only have one charter school in this county. Do the other counties only have one charter school?
No, they have more. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And we have I believe at least one more coming online next year. Yep. Magnets do have their challenges. One of the challenges with magnet schools from the entire school system perspective is to continue to provide that choice for families while maintaining the quality in all of our academic programs. Okay, we don't ever want choice to be a driver for students to leave their home school. We want students choosing those magnets for the right reasons. There's also the challenge of waiting lists. Okay, so inevitably when you have a small number of slots and more demand, people who don't get into the charter school are a little disappointed. And my wife and I live in Charlotte-Mecklenburg. We're on the other end of that. So my daughter's getting ready for kindergarten, and we went to the first open house of a magnet school and charter, and the principal told me, you'll have to go through a lottery, and you might potentially not get in. And I thought, wait a minute, I'm not sure that kind of made me bristle a little bit, and I'm in the business. So that is a challenge with magnet schools. You have waiting lists. And also within the magnet, there's a challenge with maintaining the initial momentum that a charter school gets started with. So there's a lot of excitement when you start the journey of a charter school, and a lot of energy and a lot of momentum. And over time, it's a challenge to maintain that momentum with the charter school. With the magnet school. Here you have the list of our charters. We've kind of already explained those. And let's go into our anticipated enrollment. So charter school, or I keep saying charter school, magnet school enrollment opened January 1st. We have a 30-day window for applications. This is what we anticipate based on just a year and a half of data here. For Culture and Web, we anticipate growing to 520 students. Currently it's at about 500. Culture and Web is limited by space. Okay, by literal classroom space. There is a waiting list at every grade level. Last year, we had over 300 students on the waiting list. We don't know what it is this year because the application window just started. So those applications are coming in, but all the students who were at Culture and Web get to stay at Culture and Web. So really, we're just talking about a kindergarten is the primary opening slots. Now we have a couple maybe at 3rd, 4th, 5th grade if we have some students that leave, but a large waiting list there. J.N. Freeze, we hope to get to about 600 students this coming year. And we anticipate we'll have a small waiting list for the STEM side of J.N. Freeze. And we anticipate having a small waiting list for the 6th grade portion of the IB program at J.N. Freeze School. Okay? And just to clarify, J.N. Freeze is half of that school is IB, International Baccalaureate, and the other half is STEM. So right now they have 550 students, so you could about 225 of those are STEM kids, and about 225 are International Baccalaureate students. Concord High School and Central Cabarrus High School, we opened those this year. Concord High School has the International Baccalaureate program. Next year we anticipate the following numbers for our students. We anticipate about 60 students in the 10th grade. Those students are right now 9th graders. And we anticipate about 80 students. The demand for that is not such that we believe there will be a waiting list. So we believe we'll be able to accept every student in the IB program that is qualified to attend the IB program at Concord High School based on our preliminary numbers. Central Cabarrus at the STEM school, a lot of demand for the STEM. This past year, we did not have to have a waiting list. We were able to accept every student that wanted to go in 9th grade to STEM at Central Cabarrus. That amounted to about 95 students in the freshman class there at STEM at Central Cabarrus. This coming year, we do expect to have a small waiting list just because of the last year's high enrollment. Students leaving J.N. Freeze are all lined up. They want to continue in the STEM program. So we expect about 110 students, and we do expect a small waiting list. Okay. The little bullet there to the side, that is per cohort. So we do cap the enrollment of outside attendance zone to 75 students per cohort. And again, that's due to space at Central Cabarrus. All right. Early college has been going for about 4 years. They're going to graduate their first class this coming year. Will be the first graduating class for early college. A tremendous success in all respects. They have a total enrollment of 240 students, and they accept about 63 students every year. They have a high demand, so a high waiting list there. You can see 207 applications for that first year. And again, the reason that is limited is by space. With the partnership with RCCC, there's just not enough space to increase that. New Schools Project, who we work with for the early college, has a cap of 100 per grade level. So by definition, we could never grow to more than 100, but space has limited us to about 60 in every single cohort there. And last, we have the Performance Learning Center, which is located also on the J.N. Freeze campus, at a wing off the J.N. Freeze campus. They have about 125 students there. A couple of just background things for them. Students come to the PLC after the first semester of their freshman year. They have to at least try one semester at their traditional high school before they can try to go to the PLC. Okay, PLC is not an alternative school, but it does attract students who are typically disengaged with their traditional high school. All right, so the PLC, the students that attend PLC, are some of our more at-risk students sometimes. Okay, and in talking to Jim, we hope to get that up to about 150 students next year. Again, that's the max we can do at that for space.
Can I clarify?
Yeah.
Cohort means
Cohort.
grades?
Yes, sir.
And at PLC, you don't have like a cohort, you just have a max of 125.
Right, yeah. Yeah, very fluid grades there. They can graduate as soon as they can many times. A lot of times they've lost credits because they failed classes early on, so the quicker they can get through, it's self-paced. There's no seat time requirement at the PLC. Yeah. Some future decisions that we need to look at as far as the future for magnets in Cabarrus County Schools. We would like to propose that we start the planning process for another elementary magnet. The strong waiting list that we have at Colton Webb to me signifies that we have demand for choice within Cabarrus County Schools. We would like to complement our program with an IB elementary school that would go right into the pipeline of Jan Fries and into Concord High School. Some other thoughts that we would like to explore, and we'd like to bring you in February permission to explore these options, would be thinking about what we would call mini academies at each of our high schools that follow the early college model to some extent, and with a strong partnership with RCCC. An example of that would be a biotech academy at Northwest Cabarrus High School, where students would go to Northwest Cabarrus High School for 11th and 12th grade, and in partnership with RCCC, they would have a full year done with their associate's degree. It's a 4+1 model where they would graduate from Northwest with a high school diploma, a full year done towards a biotech degree. They'd go to RCCC, take one more year, and be completely done with their associate's degree. So we would call those like mini academies. That would be for the junior and senior year. We're going to bring both of those proposals to you in February with a lot more detail, but those are some of the ideas that we're thinking about for the future of magnets. Lot to digest, so at this time I'll entertain any questions you have.
Okay, board members, you've had the agenda, and you've had this for a couple of days now, and you've heard the report from Jason, so if you have questions, let me know. Okay. Well, all right, we'll start with Jeff. Jeff, you ready?
Yes, I was wondering if you've done any market research to try to understand, where the demand is for magnet schools, both geographically and also, topic-wise.
Mm-hmm. That's a great question. We haven't done that specifically here in Cabarrus County with surveys and things like that out to our families. What I do know from the research around choice and around theme schools and around charter schools is that the number one driver is this ability to have the choice and a menu of options for my child. And as a family that's going through that right now, all of our friends are doing that same thing. They're going shopping for schools, and they're trying to match their kids up to some things that they think are available to them.
I would just suggest that next time we do a survey of parents, I know that there was one last year, that we may want to
Absolutely.
add in a few questions about, if we're considering adding magnet schools with these themes, would you be interested?
Yeah. And maybe if we explore some, start the exploratory phase with a new elementary magnet. For example, my first starting place would be the waiting list at STEM. A detailed survey. We know who those families are that are on the waiting list, and say, here's what we're thinking. Where are your thoughts in getting that data? Yeah, that would be part of the exploratory phase.
That would be a good idea.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Phillips. Mr. Harrison, do you have questions?
Yes, sir, and I'll try to be brief. But just to toss in, my eldest daughter can recite the Pledge of Allegiance in German because of a magnet program she was in long ago and far away. But that was kind of a front-end question that Mr. Phillips asked, so I kind of want to ask a back-end question, right. I hope. And I'm trying to ask what method or methodology is in place to monitor, to assess, to audit, I mean that in a very broad term, a broad way, or otherwise, are the Cabarrus County magnet programs, are they certified or reviewed somehow by somebody outside of ourselves?
Yeah.
And by that I mean, does DPI or some outside agency accreditate, to use a more academic term, our magnet programs on a regular basis? So
yeah.
I guess I'm saying, give me some proof that they're sound academic programs.
Absolutely. So to start with, we would monitor those internally through broad, our regular student achievement data. That would be our number one analysis internally for all of our programs. Are they being successful according to the metrics that we've established for student success, the state testing, SAT scores, ACT scores, etc. Another way you can measure their success is by client satisfaction, which can be measured by the demand by your waiting list. So the idea that we have a waiting list indicates, wow, people are happy, the word's out in the community, etc. Families are happy. That's kind of real surface level analysis. The International Baccalaureate does have a very rigorous accreditation process, and Jay and Freeze will have their first visit in March. And so that'll be the first chance for them to show the good work that they're doing at Jay and Freeze, and we anticipate that they will be fully authorized after their March visit. So Concord High School likewise will have to go through a similar process for the MYP, the middle years program, and their diploma program at Concord High School. Early college works closely with the New Schools Project, and so it's not necessarily an accreditation process, but they do receive visits. They do receive a community where they share ideas and they talk to each other, and they have coaches per se that come and work with the school and the teachers there to ensure the level of quality at the early college. But to specifically answer your question, STEM and PLC do not have those external outside of Cabarrus County metrics.
Should they?
I think
Can they? Is it feasible? Is it doable? Is it worthwhile or to pursue or investigate?
STEM is very new nationwide. We're currently working on a state rubric that will assess STEM programs. We have representation on that committee. Stephen Bookhart, the API at Jay and Freeze, is on that committee, has helped form that rubric. So that would be a state level way to assess the STEM program. PLC, Colleen, you were part of that. Was there any national review or external?
Communities and schools monitors that very closely.
Okay, so communities and schools monitors that. Okay, so those are the two. Yeah.
Thanks so much.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you, Mr. Harrison. Mr. Walter, do you have any comments, questions?
Yes. Again, Matthew, thank you very much for putting that together. It was very interesting and enlightening. It's good to have an update on what's going on in our system. I had a couple questions. One, on the early college, are students competing with Kannapolis City Schools for those spots, those 63 positions? Or is that just
Good question. Colleen, do you? I know it's a conjunction, but I don't know how many.
No, they're not competing. We reserve about 8 slots for Kannapolis City School students.
Okay,
And
so
that
it's
was really
proportional.
all they were willing to pay for, because every student that goes to early college from Kannapolis City Schools, they have to release them, and their money from the state comes into our coffers. So they were not willing to release too many of them.
Okay.
8 per grade.
8 per year.
8 per year?
Yeah. Yeah,
Total, out of 200.
at most. And they're really not interested in sending too many children.
Well, I think it's a good program. It's a good choice that parents have,
Yeah.
Right.
especially getting 2 years of college for free, basically. So it's a wonderful program. I can see why there's a substantial waiting list. And I think we do a great job promoting our STEM program on the elementary school level. Obviously, my kids go there. But I am concerned with having 300 plus folks on a waiting list. I mean, that's substantial when you're talking about. Do we have an idea of how many per grade level and how many are accepted or have been accepted?
For this coming year, we don't have that data
For
yet.
last year.
Half the school is magnet, so 250 of those 500 kids currently are outside of their attendance zone. So you had 300 on the waiting list and 250 in the school. So it's 50% got in and 50% did not.
And then you've got people that are already there, so that the following year, there's very few seats that are actually
Exactly,
open, other than
right.
what you were talking about, the kindergarten.
Right, kindergartens are on the entry point, yeah.
And my other question, if we do another magnet, are we looking at a 50-50?
We are, yeah.
So what do we do with the other 50% of the folks? Is there a redistricting involved? Or is it?
There potentially would be. We do have a couple elementary schools that have room in their buildings. We could look at those schools, or we would look at redistricting students to another school and use that as an opportunity to kind of address some of the growth needs that we already have. But yeah, that would come in a further proposal.
That's something else to certainly consider. Okay, those are the things I had, right?
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Walter. Mr. Conger, you have any questions?
I do. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Jason, thank you. I'll be brief because we're going to get into this more in detail in February.
Right.
But I've been a big proponent since I've been here on exactly what you wrote in one of your slides, and that's responding to the marketplace. You know, parents want to do what's best for them and their situation and their children and get the best education that they can. So I've been a big supporter of this, and I think we're doing a fantastic job of getting out there and doing that. My one word of, I don't know, caution may not be the right word, but it's a little bit of what's been said previously. When we look at that size of waiting list in a STEM program at that age, but then we're talking about maybe introducing a different program and not duplicating the one that we've got the waiting list, that to me calls for heavy investigation, just to make sure we're taking the correct steps and where we want to go and what we want to do. But again, that's all sounds like what we're going to be talking about in February.
And just to speak to that a little bit, and what we're going to ask for in February is the permission to kind of go ahead and explore what's next for elementary magnet, and that would be on the table. In surveying those families that are on the waiting list and understanding what the demand really is. One of the things we will have to be careful of is that pipeline. And so whatever we support at the elementary school, that K-12 pipeline needs to be able to support that entire program. So that'll be one of the barriers that comes into play when you think of growing the STEM at the elementary level.
Thank you, Mr. Conger. Ms. Carpenter, you have your questions.
Mine is similar to Blake's, because I'm seeing a big wait list for the STEM program where I'm not seeing it for the IB, and that's where my concern would lie. Because, you know, common sense would tell me, well, gee, I need to be looking for an elementary STEM program instead of an elementary IB program.
Right.
And so, you know, I want to please my consumers, which are the parents. And so that's where I'd be coming from. So I want to make sure that we are looking in that direction, because that's where we see, you know, if we look at the real numbers, that's where it needs to be. So that's where I want to see that we maybe go in that direction. So that's why in February, that's where I'd like to see that we do look. And we have seen that again, on David's perspective, you know, a lot of this board was not here when we had our first magnet not succeed. And so, you know, that's where I would like to see us make sure that we do have that, where we are monitoring that. And so, you know, have an out, and there's Colleen, she's coming, yeah, she remember that, right?
Yes, I do. And I want to say that the most important thing in a magnet success is the magnet keeping its focus on what the purpose is. And if you'll remember, the magnet that we had before lost its purpose, and it lost its focus, and the enrollment declined. But we lost the energy in what was going on. And so I think what you have right now is a whole different ball game, where you have the PLC that's been in operation for about 6 years now. You have the early college, which is entering its 4th year. You have a change in the national and state and local political interest of parents, where they're more inclined or more interested in selecting the school that their children go to, rather than what we had, what was it, 9 years ago is when the School for Environmental Studies was opened. So the other thing, if I might say this, Barry, we do only have one charter school in this system, but we send children to about 8 charter schools that surround us.
One of the things that, and you know, Colleen, as you know, one of the reasons when we did what we did before, the cost factor of the chart, you know, our very first magnet, the cost factor went through what it was costing us.
Right.
And, you know, when we look at when we started considering the magnets before, you know, the IB program, that is a very, very costly program compared to other magnets. And, you know, when we're looking at this, the cost factor with this, and again, we've got to be very careful when we're looking at this, what we do. And today was a perfect example. We were very, very fortunate today to have the STEM bus come from the state come to us, that supplied by the PLC from the community colleges. 4 of our members were able to be with us to see this wonderful opportunity. The PLC received a $20,000 grant from Verizon for the PLC for the STEM program for the PLC. We were very fortunate to receive this grant, and we want to thank Verizon for this. But we've been very fortunate for these type of things.
I want to say one more thing. There's a different expectation than 8-10 years ago, in that the School for Environmental Studies was, in my opinion, not necessarily of the understanding that they had to become self-supporting. And I think one of the things that we've talked about it a lot is that magnet schools have to become self-supporting. They have to draw the income that they need to, whether it's through grants or whether it is through donations or however it is. It can't be a special place where we funnel all the system money. They have to become self-supporting. Would you agree with that?
Absolutely, and they are. And we talk about that with our principals. Back to your point about the marketplace. The marketplace gives and the marketplace takes away. So if we're not providing a good product, there is no more waiting lists, right? And so our principals know that very well.
Right.
Yeah.
And that's one of the things I think all of the board members saw, that the IB program did not have wait lists, where we saw with the STEM, and I think that's where all of us are kind of coming from on this.
And I think you're going to have to see what the elementary interests are of those 300 families, whether or not they're choosing a more rigorous school or choosing a STEM school. And to answer Jeff Phillips' question, we actually did a market survey about 5 years ago when we were beginning this, and we surveyed elementary parents as well as middle school parents to see, number one, if they were interested in a magnet program, and number two, to determine what topics they were most interested in. And the two that came back at the highest level were STEM program and IB program. An arts program came in. They had all sorts of ideas about what it should consist of, but those were the two highest.
Thank you.
Some of the things that we need to take in consideration, that is, we never like to talk about our non-successes, or that ugly word, failure. And, you look back, because I was on the board during the time that we did the environmental school for, studies there, and thinking back now, it might have been, and this is just only my opinion, but it might have been just a little bit ahead of its time. It might have been a little ahead of its time, which is not unusual for Cabarrus County Schools. We try to be a front runner and try to, keep things out front there. But whereas the STEM program, as you know, has had the pleasure of getting nationwide attention, and so therefore it has been very productive, whereas the IB program has not enjoyed that same attention as the STEM program. And that might be part of the reason, Ms. Carpenter, that we don't have the waiting list for IB, whereas we do on STEM, because I've heard President Obama speak about the STEM program in the beginning of his term, and that's right along the same time that we got our STEM programs and IBM programs running. So, but anyway, Dr. Shepard had a few comments. I think he wants to maybe reiterate on something Dr. Sain said, but Dr. Shepard, I didn't want to leave you out.
Well, thank you. I wanted to make the exact point that Colleen did about checking the community's desires a few years back. I would also say that our community probably knows more about the topic of STEM than they do International Baccalaureate. And I would predict, as what I'm familiar in other counties, when you have a high school student who finishes the program and they're moving into college, and the word gets out how that program has helped that child find the right placement in college or university, then parents will be more interested in getting their children in the IB pipeline earlier. And as you were saying, if you're in the IB program at Freeze, then you're guaranteed a spot in the program at Concord. And I would assume that if we were to start a primary years program, if you're in the pipeline early on, then you would be allowed to continue all the way through. I think it will become far more competitive once our parents understand, and I think that I wonder if if we had opened an IB STEM at Coltrane rather than a STEM, would we not now have the same number of students and 300 students on a waiting list and be asking ourselves, do we need to open a second IB rather than a STEM? So I like the addition that Colleen made to the conversation that we have surveyed. We know those were the two highest levels of interest. We've opened one type of school at the elementary, two at the middle, two at the high school, but we're lacking part of the equation at the elementary school now. And this conversation that we say we were going to have in February, we've had a lot of it tonight, but that's all right. That's all right. It shows we're interested in moving forward.
One brief comment, I know we're getting ready, I don't mean to step on you. I found it interesting that ExxonMobil has invested in STEM and are running ads that use the phrase STEM, and so the public perception of a STEM program is going to grow because you can't help but see those. So, but anyway, that's just an interesting piece of the equation to me as far as I'm concerned.
You're right, Mr. Cabarrus. Thank you. Board members, are there any other questions, comments? Barry, I'm sorry, Barry, I didn't mean to leave you out.
That's what happens when you're at the end there.
I've been there before too. Don't worry. You have to move up.
I won't let you forget me. Jason, obviously the IB is just beginning at Concord. This is like the first year, right?
Right.
And so you haven't gotten your accreditation for IB at this point.
Right.
You're still working in that direction. How long will that take for us to get?
That'll, at the end of next year, we'll have full accreditation or authorization at Concord. So the current 9th graders, when they enter 11th grade, they will enter a fully authorized diploma program so that they will receive the IB diploma when they graduate.
All right, and so our first IB graduation will be in 2015-16. Is that correct?
I think so. They're currently 9th graders, so 3 years.
Right, so that's what we're seeing as a maturation of both of the STEM program and the IB program is cycling the children through. And obviously the STEM program has gotten a lot more press than the IB is, even though I think the IB is equally as good, if not better.
Yeah. Well, and the IB, remember, going back to Dr. Shepard's point, lacks the elementary component as a kind of foundational pipeline to get kids right in, whereas Culture and Web, 5th graders go right to J and Fried's. They've got a built-in draw already. Yeah.
Right. The other question that I have is, there's also this push in the CTE world, and we have CTE specialties at different on different campuses,
Right.
but we don't have like a magnet type process. So if you wanted to do, and I'm not sure of all our CTE specialties, but if you wanted to do some specialty and you were on the other side of the county, you wouldn't have the opportunity to visit that campus to take that. And is there have we done any analysis on that demand? Because our system needs to build not only children who are going to go to colleges, but we need to build children who are students who are going to enter the workplace and provide the nuts and bolts support of our maintenance and of our equipment and that type of stuff. And we need to make sure that we're providing a funnel for those types of folks. And I don't know where we are in that, if you've given much thought to that vision.
We have, and that would be kind of the foundation of that mini academy idea at each of our high schools, that each of our high schools would have some sort of draw for them at the later years of high school that would be really aligned to the demand, the workforce demand that we experience here in Cabarrus County and in this region, but also within the state. So that idea of the Biotech Academy at Northwest Cabarrus High School would be a step in that direction.
Define CTE, please.
CTE is career and technical education, vocational education. Other counties have used, have a CTE campus where they have most of their high-level CTE programs in one place, and students from all over the county come there in 10th grade, 11th grade when they can start to drive, and they finish out their years there. But those are approaches that we would like to explore. Yeah.
Okay, you all finished, Mr. Shoemaker? You all done?
Mr. Chair.
Yes.
Just a comment. I believe I heard you were saying that you were trying to market the IB program to broaden the base.
We are, yeah. I mean, yeah.
I'm sorry. I'm from Rowan County. I can barely say baccalaureate.
Okay.
But all of you, of course, know what that entails and what that involves. But if International Baccalaureate were in tiny print in a way, but you said tough school, hard school, high standards, or instead of emphasizing the IB word, it might mean more to parents
Rigor.
trying to get their kids into that kind of program.
Yeah.
I don't mean to dumb it down. I simply mean that it's a foreign concept,
Right.
practically,
Yeah.
to a lot of people. But the high standards are well worth the effort.
Yeah.
Okay, everybody clear?
Mr.
Mr.
Chairman,
Phillips, okay.
one last question popped into my head. What is the transportation policy for the magnet schools? I believe when the STEM Elementary first started, you were offering transportation throughout the county.
Year one, we were going to save the world. Okay? We were going to do it. We went to every house and picked up every child. The cost of that, however, is prohibitive. Year two, we have hub stops at most of the schools. There are times when schools are close enough together that we can combine them and have hub stops. But other than the initial worry of parents because they didn't know what was happening, it's actually been a very good year. So we go to Concord at 8 o'clock in the morning and we pick up about 25 kids and we take them over to J.N. Freeze, whether they're magnet or STEM.
Okay, everybody clear? Thank you, Jason, for the report. Appreciate all the hard work that you do. All right, board members, we'll progress on to 4.4, where we'll have an assessment requirement for 2014. Dr. Probst and Mr. Matthew Fail, and they're on their way to the podium, so whenever you guys get ready, we're ready to go.
Just want to make sure that the board is informed that North Carolina does have intentions of moving all of the state assessments, the end-of-grade EOG or end-of-course EOCs, to online assessments by 2014 and 2015 school year. The reasoning behind that is that the state feels that they can offer assessments that have multi-part or media enhanced, perhaps performance-based assessments, online versus paper and pencil. In addition, accommodations can be offered a whole lot more easily with an online assessment. The primary example of that is read-aloud assessments can now be controlled by the student who wears a headset and can follow along with the reading at their own pace and can even have things repeated without having to be in a group of students who has to follow the course of the whole group. And finally, they feel like moving to online assessments will allow them to be ready for any advancements and assessments in the future. You have been provided with the online assessment calendar. You'll see that primarily the EOCs, that's the end of course for high schools, are going to be online assessments this year, in addition to science at grades 5 and 8. And the North Carolina Extend 2 for many of those same subjects. And then the following year, all of the other assessments will go online as well. In addition to those assessments, the state has implemented what they're calling common exams, or what was first called measures of student learning, or MSLs. Those are what they consider non-tested subject areas. Those assessments will be coming online beginning this year. By online, I mean we'll be giving them, not online, meaning that they will be online assessments. Sorry about that confusion. The assessments will be given this year. We want to look into online options so that those assessments can be given electronically as well. We're not prepared for that this year, but it is an option we're going to continue to explore. You see that schedule for the MSLs beginning this year, or the common assessments beginning this year. This will have a great impact on our technology needs across the district, and Dr. Probst is going to share with you the impact that it may have.
In addition, today we read about the state school board reviewing a proposed policy that all students starting in grade 6 through 12 must take an online course prior to graduation. We like that aspect from the aspect that these technology wouldn't just become an assessment piece, that it would be part of their instruction, and that is something that's really important to us. The issue is all of these mandates are unfunded. The online testing is unfunded. If they move and adopt the policy on an online course, it's unfunded. And so the pressure on the districts to provide I'll call them endpoints or devices, to take the assessments as well as learn every day is high. Technology is expensive. We put this on the agenda so that we could answer your questions regarding where we are in the situation. The report that you have from me on there is simply taken right off the state report cards. It's a ratio of devices to students. And I put this on there so that you could see that it's not we have inequities, just like we do with facilities. We have schools that are ready and we have schools that are not with their technologies. In addition, the report that's put out by the state doesn't really give the whole picture because it says any device that can get to the internet. With the testing requirements, they are being extremely tight on what devices they say can be used for testing. And if you think about it, if your child was in a classroom and was taking an assessment on a desktop with a 21-inch monitor, would you want your other child taking an assessment on an iPhone? And I think the answer would probably be no. So what we're in the process of doing, and you'll be receiving reports, is analyzing each school as well as room by room. Some of the issues that we have is that our testing groups are not perfect. We don't have nice little testing groups of 24 or 30. Sometimes we have 6. Sometimes we do have 30. And you can't just unplug all the computers and say, okay, let's move them all to this site. Let's move them all around. It's very complicated. So basically, we just wanted to tell you to get ready for the budget report that'll come up in March, because there'll probably be a request for technology. So any questions?
Okay, board members, your time for questions. Anybody have any concern? We'll start on your side, Mr. Shoemaker.
Well, Kelly, I was looking at the list of elementary schools, and I was kind of shocked at the ones that are really lagging behind, because some of them are our more recent schools. So can you kind of enlighten me?
I can enlighten you a little bit. I've been in this position for 2 years, so some of what I'm trying to go back to is historical. What I can tell you is in the last 2 years, probably the last 5 schools that we've built, A.T. Allen, Patriots, Hickory Ridge Middle, Winkler, I know those 4, there was a separate line item in construction for technology. Prior to that, there was not. The principal was given an amount of money that had to cover technology as well as the desks and all the other materials, which that made it very difficult. In addition, we took over that piece, and that does not go, when we're building those schools, we take full control over the technology. I can tell you that there was a big difference between building Winkler and building A.T. Allen. The prices of technology consistently drop with every year. The prices of servers and switches, as well as the desktops and laptops, have dropped over the last couple of years. So if your money goes a lot further. And when you look at A.T. Allen, please realize that it does include a lot of iPods, which those are not testing devices. But on that report, you had to put that an iPod could connect to the internet.
Well, I was more referring to schools like Furr, Boger, actually Cox Mill, which I was shocked, Pitt School Road.
Okay, all of those.
These guys are in really high 4s and high 3s.
All of those were built prior to the rule where we had the separate technology budget.
And when Cox Mill, Cox Mill, when C.C. Griffin and Harris Road were built, we were on incredibly skinny budgets. So I had enough to put 2 computers in the classroom, one of which had to be the teacher's. Now, 10 years ago, we were operating on a very slim margin. Some of the later schools had more money to work with.
So the schools that are much older, they have a better ratio. Do you count that from an active parent group that's helping supply the equipment?
There's several pieces on that. I will tell you that we took over the renewal cycle, and instead of just updating little bits of pieces of schools, we update the entire school. So when you see an older school and the ratio is better, it means probably in the last 2 or 3 years they were part of that renewal cycle. I will say that in terms of the county, we are in the position we're in. because of our parents in terms of their help. We would even be far worse off with this data if it wasn't for our PTOs and our school improvement teams that look at the monies that come in from the state and realize, we've got to put some money towards technology. It has been a grassroots effort.
In some of our older schools, there also are Title I schools. Would you not say that we've spent some Title I money on technology that would improve that ratio?
Absolutely. That's a good point. The 10 Title I schools do allocate some of that Title I money to help with the ratios.
Thank you, Mr. Shoemaker. Ms. Carpenter, you have questions? Okay, you're going to pass. Okay, Mr. Geiger, you have questions? No, I'm fine. Okay, how about Mr. Walter?
I have a few questions. So you have an idea of how many pieces of technology we're going to need? I mean, is that...
I was asked that question the other day, and they said, what's the ideal situation? And I said a 1-to-1. One child, one device.
So that would be thousands.
Millions.
I mean, thousands of devices. Devices, I'm sorry. Obviously, that does get into millions, yes.
At this point, I would estimate probably close to 20,000
20,000
devices.
Yes. that
we have currently close to 15,000 devices, and you have to remember we have a pretty high. We have a staff of 4,500, and there are very few positions in this county that you can do your job without having a piece of technology.
Right. Now, are there software issues as well? I mean, with these testing requirements?
At this point, we meet all the requirements from the state. Most of the assessments will be web-based, and we're not having an issue. The software requirement that we are having is with the new Power School that's coming in next year, and we will have to be re-imaging all the machines this summer, which, for those of you that were on the board last year, I'm sure you heard that that's a big task. And remember, it's not just buying the device, it's all the licensing that comes involved with a running enterprise.
Well, the licensing and the folks that have to maintain it, and if they get some type of virus and whatever.
Yes,
sir.
sir.
There's a lot of work involved in technology. And I like the point that use it more than just testing. Is there thought process of using it for like textbooks and that type of thing in the future?
We are extremely interested in looking at online content. There are neighboring districts that do not have textbooks. They do not have paper and pencil. Everything is taught online. We already are working with a company called Discovery Ed, and we do have online content available. We use it for enrichment and enhancement and remediation, as well as we are already doing our own in-house benchmarks online with the same company. But very, very much so interested. But there's still money on online textbooks. So instead of buying a book for $75 that you have for 6 years and it's a hardbound book, you have to buy an electronic version for less money, probably around $40, but it disappears after 6 years.
Okay.
There's a time limit on it.
And I guess my last question had to do with is it the EOGs that are coming online this year? Is that what it is?
For the end of grade, and when we say end of grade, we're talking about grades 3 through 8. It will only be the science end of grade that comes on, that will be delivered online, and that is grade 5 and grade 8. The high school end of course, or EOCs, are going online this year.
This year. And then what I'd heard is that we will not get the results of those until the following year. Why would that be if it's electronic, you ought to be able to get it quicker?
This has to do with them essentially renorming the assessment. It's a brand new assessment. That doesn't have anything to do with it being online or paper and pencil. There's a whole lot of processes that their analysts are going to have to follow in order to renorm the assessment and then provide us with those results. New scale scores and the like. That'll be the same for the end of grade, for reading and math, grades 3 through 8, the science, grade 5 and grade 8, and all of the EOCs.
And that whole issue of delaying the results goes back to about 2001 when they renormed the math test in North Carolina. And the results were published, and we were all excited because in every school, 95% of the kids were proficient in mathematics. They had not renormed it properly at the state level. So since that point, they've insisted that all testing be completed. They'll be able to analyze the results, determine how many students they actually want to pass the test, and then release the results so that we're not, we want all students to pass, but we don't want to make the test so easy or the scoring so easy. So it is frustrating that results will be released in October, but it's maybe as time goes on and we're renorming, as tests are more computerized, we can get it sooner than October, but That is the reason behind it.
Thank you. That's all I had, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Walter. Mr. Harrison?
And again, thank you all for all this great work. I like information. I don't always know what to do with it, but I like these kinds of details. I was going to ask the columns for the district score of 2.08 and the state score or ratio of 1.79. I would almost rather see a calculation based on all the elementary schools and all of the middle schools and all of the high schools, as opposed to these global numbers of 2.08 and 1.79. But I suppose we can't break that down for this purpose.
Again, it's a state report.
Right.
Again, it's a state report, and we can request, see what they do.
Okay. I'm not necessarily asking for a whole lot of work, but to me, the numbers would make more sense grouped and scored in the ratios per all elementaries, all middle, and all high schools, if that were relevant or a more accurate ratio to look at. I'm just speculating. On, for example, Culture and Web, its score is 1.1, or its ratio is 1.1. Back to our earlier discussion of the STEM program. How does this ratio affect special programs in a school? I mean, I'm trying to ask hopefully an intelligent question, but if the ratio of these online assessments are low at Culture and Web, but Culture and Web has a STEM program intended to attract parents and qualified kids to those programs, something seems out of whack or out of balance to me. I'm not sure if that's
They're actually in a
well-worded question, but I hope you can see what I'm trying to say.
They are. Culture and Web is actually in a pretty good position. They're almost at a 1-to-1, one child per device.
I'm sorry, I'm misreading the number then. My fault.
It's the opposite. And additional monies were put into the STEM programs. Both Culture and Web, Jay and Freeze, as well as the STEM project out at Central are almost at a 1-to-1.
I'm sorry. So it's Beverly Hills, for example, which is
not a magnet.
Gotcha now.
And that's like 3 students to every one device.
So the online assessment at Culture and Web is a good ratio, especially all the more so for the STEM type program.
Right, and why you would feel comfortable about it is this is a child at that school that is touching technology all day long.
Right.
So now they take an assessment, we feel good about the fact that they're used to touching that device and using it. Whereas at the smaller school, Beverly Hills, we're going, okay, that's 3 children to 1 device. Mm-hmm. We've got to make sure that there's a schedule and everybody's using technology. And then it's going to take us 3 times longer at Beverly Hills to get online and take the test as to Culture and Web. And that's where we get those inequities, and we really need to be addressing those.
So the inequities are, for example, in Pitt School Road.
Exactly.
And those. I beg your pardon. I appreciate the clarification.
Good questions, Mr. Harrison. Thank you for your comments. Mr. Phillips?
I'll call that a learning opportunity for me.
Okay. Well, I think I told both of you earlier that I'm fighting blaming the messenger for the message, because I don't like a lot of the messages that are in this report, and certainly this table with the ratio of devices to students and the massive discrepancies that exist across the district is just shocking to me. I knew we had discrepancies. I didn't realize they were this striking, and I think that this board has to do something in the coming year to start to address this, and it's not by robbing Peter to pay Paul. We've got to do that. But I think just as importantly, we need to come up with policies that prevent this kind of discrepancies from growing back into the system in the future. And I'd also want to know, where else do we have discrepancies and inequalities across the district? Is it beyond just the computer technology? I'm not asking you to answer that. That's just a rhetorical question. But that's my soapbox. Now, I do have a couple of questions regarding the testing themselves. I've heard that these new, what did you call them, the MLSs or whatever it was, the common exams.
Yeah.
You said that we're starting to implement them this year, but we can't do them online right now. As I understand, because we can't do them online, we're going to be killing a lot of trees. That some of these tests are many, many pages. Is that right?
They're roughly, on average, about 25 pages per assessment, so yes.
Yeah. So
The interesting thing is when we met with the teacher rep group, they actually were advocates for paper and pencil because they've been working with their kids on strategies with the paper and pencil assessment. So it all plays hand in hand with what we have in terms of access to technology, because we've got to get it so that kids are using that technology on a daily basis so that there is a level of comfort and the teachers can train them on the strategies with the device. Until that time, paper and pencil, like I said, was teachers were advocates for that because that's what they're using in many instances. So, but yes, we will kill a few trees.
yeah, and so that's another unfunded part of the mandate.
Oh yes.
Oh
yes.
I guess if there's any companies out there that have some excess photocopying paper they want to donate to the schools, you'll gladly take them. But you kind of led into my second question, which was, for instance, on the online EOGs for the 5th grade and the 8th grade science. Are these students going to have exposure to computers before they go in and have to take that test that day?
Well, I'm going to answer to the best of my ability, and then Dr. Probst can certainly add, and Jason can add to that as well if he would like. But my understanding is that every student in the district has access to computer time at some point during the week. How much access is completely dependent on how many devices they have in the building. But every school of which I'm familiar has a computer lab or two in which kids are brought to on some sort of schedule, depending on the level. High school's not necessarily going to the lab per se, as they're using it when it's needed, and elementaries tend to have schedules for access to the lab, and so do middle schools. Is that fairly accurate?
The only other thing I would have said is we're currently, with our benchmarks, already working with students taking assessments online.
Okay, that's a good, but that's good to hear. So they will have taken computer-based test earlier in the year, so these EOGs will not be their first time to have to navigate that.
And the benchmark assessment that we're using, the company that we're using, is formatting it in such a way that it'll be very similar.
Okay.
So hopefully it won't be such a shock.
Okay. My final line of questioning has to go with, I don't know if it's part of the norming or some kind of vetting of these new exams. I understand that there's a need for the teachers outside of their normal classroom activities to help vet those exams, looking at each question to see whether there are cultural biases and so on and so forth. Is that true? And could you explain a little bit more about what's required there?
All right, I want to make sure which exams you're talking about. The end of course and the end of grade are new exams that will now measure the Common Core. Then we have the common exams, which are completely new exams,
Yes.
also measuring the Common Core. Both done a little differently.
Okay.
The end of grade and end of course go through a much more rigorous process. Teachers still are paid to help write questions and stuff, but the vetting process is much more intense in terms of difficulty level of questions and all the analyses that go into making a complete assessment, and some of those assessment items have been exposed in previous assessments to sort of vet all of those kind of elements to create a state-normed assessment. Then you have the common assessments. The common assessments, the state also brought in groups of teachers, provided them with some professional development around how the assessments should be built and that kind of thing, and then teachers built those assessments. Did not go through the same kind of rigor as a state assessment for the end of grade and end of course went through.
So this has already occurred. That's not what this norming process is that Dr. Shepard just mentioned.
No, the norming process for the state end of grade and end of course test can occur until after the assessment has been given and they've gotten scores from all across the state. And then to norm it, they have to take a look at the bell curve and figure out kind of where people fell. They also have to look at certain questions that, if 99% of the students across the state missed, is it a valid question? They've got all of those kinds of things to do in order to determine the final valid scores that they can provide to us. And those are projected to be delivered around October of 2013. The common exams, however, will get those scores immediately after giving the assessments.
But because we go through that norming process, we guarantee that a certain fraction of the students in the state will be labeled as failures, no matter how good their performance actually was. Is that right?
Technically speaking, yes. This is the baseline year.
This is why we need to push back and say that there's too many of these standardized test exams.
Thank you, Mr. Phillips. A couple of things that I wanted to mention, and this to bring to the attention of our new board members in particular, a couple of the reasons that we are behind the eight ball when it comes to technology. Obviously, you got to remember that we have built a ton of schools in the last 12 to 14 years, almost $500 million in schools and renovations and replacements and the education center and the bus garage and all these different things. And so when you take in consideration the Cabarrus County is probably paying out, and I don't have the figures, I'm sure Ms. Klutz probably has these figures, but I would say that Cabarrus County is paying out probably $20 million a year or a month possibly, I don't know how often, or probably a year I would say, out to debt, for all these schools, $20 million a year going out. And you think what we could do with $20 million going into technology. So when you think about paying for schools, that takes away money that we could use for technology to bring us up to 1-to-1, as Ms. Probst had suggested. And then another thing that we need to look at is the state of North Carolina. They still owe the school systems in North Carolina excess of $700 million for fines and forfeitures that was earmarked for technology that we have never received and more than likely will never receive. I talked to one of the senators and I asked him point blank, when you guys going to settle up with us on this $700+ million, not counting interest and the last year or two's worth of fines and forfeitures that they've added to this? And he said, probably never. So when you look at that, when you look at the school construction and the money that is owed to us, it's literally millions and millions of dollars, and if we had just a small portion of that, we could compete with some of these neighboring counties that have 1-to-1 or 1-to-2, whereas when you look at ours, I don't know, I didn't take and add it all up just to see what our across-the-board average is for elementary, middle, and high. You may have those numbers across the board versus having them by school, but it's still far short from 1-to-1. And that's where we need to be. And when the online assessments come on, we've got to find ways to make it more equitable for the students that are taking it, rather than being a month apart, maybe a day or two apart, or that they have a fair playing field to have fair scores. But anyway, are there any other questions, comments, concerns from the board reference this report that they have given to us? All right, hearing none. Thank you very much for being here. Thank you for the report that you provided us with. And we look forward to seeing things get a little bit better for us when it comes to technology and hearing some good results on the EOCs, EOGs. Okay? Thank you so very much. All right, board members, we're going to move on to, we've got one item tonight that is, this item is 5.1, budget amendments. Ms. Kelly Klutz is at the podium with us, and we'll be talking about this briefly this evening, and then when we come back on the 14th, if we've got consensus from the board tonight, then we'll vote on the budget amendments on the 14th. So with that being said, Ms. Klutz, the podium's yours, and take as much time as you need to let us know about the budget amendments, and then we'll move on to the next item.
Thank you. I have several budget amendments that you've had prior access to, and I'm going to call your attention to a couple of things, and then you call my attention to anything that you have questions in regards to. The state budget amendment is just a reclass, and then we have a local allocation. Then the third one, the federal budget amendment, is primarily just a reclass. there's a small reduction of funds for Title I of Planning versus Actual. That budget's about a $3.5 million. So when we did a planning, there was just a small variance in how much we actually received there. That's not that alarming or unexpected for us to have that there. So what I do want to call your attention to is our budget amendment number 5, capital outlay funding. We want to thank the county for these projects that are listed here, the $1.6 million. We've had several discussions about which projects in particular, but just overall, we want to thank the county for these, the funding of these projects. And then the final budget amendment is a joint project with Boger PTO and Parks and Rec, is for a marquee for their school for $26,000, and we appreciate that also. Are there any specific questions about budget amendments?
Okay, I open the floor for questions on the budget amendments. Mr. Phillips?
On those capital improvements, first of all, I absolutely agree with what you said. We need to thank the county commissioners for doing this. I know that they are dealing with very tight budgets, just as we have been for several years, and for them to be able to find this money and allocate it just speaks highly of their value of education. I think you had mentioned the tennis courts at Concord High School, and someone else had mentioned to me the J. Robinson Fieldhouse construction might not, that amount may not be enough to do what we really want to do, but this is what we have been given by the commissioners, and we don't really have the flexibility to say, well, we'd rather put more here and less there. So we should just thank them for what we've got, and then we'll figure out how we can improve upon it later.
Right.
Is that right?
We certainly we have some flexibility within the locks, moving those funds around in the camera systems within like groups, as I understand it from the commissioners, and we appreciate that flexibility. But as far as the field house and the tennis courts, we do not have any flexibility there, but certainly we'll need to look into different other options as far as fundraising and those types of things for additional funds.
Okay, and we'll revisit this a little bit more when Mr. Whitkey gets up, I think, to talk about the designing of these projects.
Yes,
Okay.
certainly. Mm-hmm.
That's all I have.
Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Phillips. Mr. Harrison?
No, sir, no questions.
Thank you. Mr. Walter, you have questions? Okay, Mr. Kiger, you have questions? Ms. Carpenter, questions?
No, I mean,
Turn the mic on.
is he going to discuss that about the tennis courts? Okay.
All we do is reallocating the money. Okay, making the budget amendment. Mr. Shoemaker, you have any questions, comments? No. Okay, board members, do I have a consensus from all of you that we'll put this on the consensus agenda on the 14th for approval? Everybody good with that? Okay, so Ms. Klutz, you have it on the consent agenda for the 14th.
Okay.
All right, thank you very much. Okay, board members, we need to move along, and let's see what else we got here. I think that Ms. Klutz is going to be here to talk to us. Now, these action items, we have two, and we will need to vote on these tonight. Vote them up, vote them down, move them on out. So the first one is the sequestration resolution, and Ms. Klutz is going to tell us about this item.
Right. So sequestration could affect schools and education, and so we didn't know for sure on New Year's Day. There was law passed that we were unsure as to whether this would affect us, continue to affect us or not. So on Wednesday we came back to work and we started digging to see how this would impact us, and so as we started working through the process, we decided that, or we determined that basically they just delayed the decision about 2 months, and this still can impact us. So we need to sign this resolution, state that we can't take any additional cuts to education. That's just clear. We've taken enough cuts, state, local, as we can take to education. That's just firm. The good news is, if there is good news about a cut, is that we are only federally funded about 6%, whereas other systems could be funded as much as 23% federal. So it will not hurt us as much as it will other systems, but it could be a significant impact to school systems. So as school systems and education, we need to stand firm and strong that education can't take any more cuts. So this is definitely something that we should support.
Ms. Klutz, just for the benefit of the viewing audience, for all the people that's going to be looking at this on YouTube and all, will you explain to them as well as the board, I'm sure the board has looked at this, but the potential impact had the fiscal cliff taken place? Obviously it didn't. But there might be a revised version or something like that coming out, and so that would be on that first attachment that you have, and you could, if you would explain so the viewing audience would know what sequestration is. They might be a totally Greek word to them. Okay.
For Cabarrus County Schools, since we are only funded about 6% federal, it will only impact certain funding areas of federal for us. There's about 5 funding programs, not all of them, and it could impact Cabarrus County Schools. They're suggesting 8.2% was that original number of these particular federal programs. We don't know if that's where it will end, but that's the suggestion, and that could be for Cabarrus County Schools. That's about $866,000, and certainly we do not have that to give back to anyone. And again, since that's only 6% funding for us, for Cabarrus County Schools, if you take a system and imagine that at 23% of their funding, that could be a significant amount for a system that relies heavily on federal funding.
Okay, you can continue on with the actual resolution, or do you want me to read the resolution?
Oh, do you want us to read the resolution? It's pretty long. Do we need to?
Actually, I've read some longer than this.
Okay.
But board members, everybody I feel like knows what we're asking, and like I said earlier, there's extremely good potential that we will not even need this resolution at all. But I would rather for us to be safe than sorry, and have the resolution on file to stand that we do not support any more cuts in education of any kind, whether it be any of the programs, because we don't get what we need as it is. And so I would rather have this on file, ready to use, whether we ever use it or not. It's better to have it than have to go through all this again. And actually, we were a little bit late in getting this prepared because it was supposed to take place January 2nd. And obviously, this is January the 7th. So, but I'd rather still go ahead and have it on file. But I would like to give the board opportunity to say whatever they feel about it, and then we'll vote on this one way or the other. And we'll start on Mr. Shoemaker's side if you have questions about the resolution, sequestration resolution.
My only comment is I agree with you, Kelly, Title I exceptional children, when you look at the bigger dollars associated with those, the other programs we could probably handle, but those are major programs over $720,000, and this, how would you handle children that are associated with those programs? And I'm sure the federal government's not going to give you a reprieve on making sure that they're taken care of. So.
Thank you, Mr. Shoemaker. Ms. Carpenter, you have your questions?
No, and I cannot agree with you more, Lynn. We have taken the cuts, and I think we should go ahead and have it, and I have no problem with going ahead and sending it. It's better to be safe than sorry, and as Barry mentioned earlier, the programs that are affected are ones that they are still going to require us to do. They're still going to require us to keep the mandates in and to still keep, all the requirements they require us to do. And so I say go ahead and pass it, and I have no problem with going ahead and sending it.
Thank you, Ms. Carpenter. Mr. Kiger?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I may go slightly against the grain here. I thought quite a bit about what I wanted to say about this, and I do want to be brief. Nobody wants to hear me talk about this, I can assure you of that. When you talk about a resolution, all of a sudden, now we're talking about something that's philosophical. We're not voting on something specific to our district or what we're doing. we're sort of hitching our wagon to everybody else and talking about philosophy. And I don't in any way want to discount the programs that you listed and the dollar amounts that are there. All of the people involved with those programs work extraordinarily hard, do a very good job for my seat and what I get to go see and our limited role of actually being out there day to day. But you hit the nail on the head when you said, well, they just delayed it a little bit. Well, it was a debt ceiling deal from a time ago. That was a deal from a time before that they're going to do that same thing again. And if we have a resolution or spend time talking about those things that are system-wide or a resolution, every time that there's some catastrophe or crisis coming out of Washington, we're not going to have time to get anything else done. For whatever reason, in the last 4 years, 5 years, everything's a crisis. Everything needs to be done right now. We have to do it this way. Nobody presents evidence of why we should do one thing or another, or in that case. And so I don't know. It just rubs me the wrong way that the federal government is spending trillions. The word trillion is even now in our lexicon. Trillion was unheard of 8 years ago, 10 years ago. Well, it's trillions, billions every minute. While we've been sitting here, we've spent billions that we don't even have. We don't have it, and we're spending it. And it goes on and on and on and on. And so, I'll cut it off here. I know when I'm driving home, there'll be something I wish I hadn't said and a few things that I wish I had said a little better, a little bit easier or a better way. But I just don't see the need for us to go through this exercise. And so, Mr. Chairman, I'm going to vote no. It's not that I have anything against the programs that we have in place. It's just a philosophical discussion.
No problem. We had this talk earlier today. You told me the same thing then, so that's certainly all right, Mr. Kiger, no problem. Okay, Mr. Walter, do you have any comments, questions?
Just a couple. Who's it sent to, or whose hands does it end up in?
This ends up with the National School Board Association, not the North Carolina School Board Association, but the National School
So it
Board,
goes
which
to
is
the
our national lobbyist.
Okay, so it's a lobbying effort, basically, a bunch of these
Yeah,
from a bunch of different school
Well, that's what I'm
systems?
saying. It's a little bit late because we really should have done this in December so that they would have been ready for the January 1st vote whenever they settled the financial cliff. And it was supposed to take effect on January the 2nd. But since they modified what they agreed upon, and I agree with what Mr. Kiger said, by the way, it's always going to be a mess up there till they get people like Blake up there. Yeah, get Blake up there, But seriously though, I mean, Washington, everybody knows. You don't need me to tell you, but Washington's messed up. They've been messed up, and I know there's thousands of people going to watch this, but they know too. And that's why we're in the situation we're in, and everything Blake said is true. But this is where I disagree with him. I would rather have the resolution in somebody's hands saying, no, we're not going to stand for no more cuts in education, period, than to not do anything at all. I believe you're either for it or you're against it. You can't be in the middle. And so I'm clear to say that I'm against any more budget cuts. And that's what we're saying here. This is what this board, if this board votes on this and approves this, that's what we're saying. No, we don't want no more cuts in education. Okay, Rob, that got you straightened out?
Yeah, I mean, I understand the concept of us discussing this right now, but I don't really see how much of a difference it's going to make one way or the other by signing it. And
It may not. Ms. Klutz, can you address it? You said it might be 2 months before we know anything for sure.
Well, they've delayed the decision for 2 months, so they should be arguing the point between now and those 2 months. So it doesn't mean that they won't delay it again after those 2 months.
So
But
basically, you're saying we're not out of the woods on this yet.
We're
Just
not out of
because
the
the
woods.
financial cliff was overcome, that doesn't mean we're out of the woods yet. And that's what further reason why I say we need to sign it, get it on up there, put it to bed, and be done with it.
Right.
Okay, I'm just I don't think a resolution is going to be very effective to Washington, but I think we do need to discuss it, and we got our point across, so thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Walter. Mr. Harrison.
The question of who the audience has been addressed and answered. Who's the author? Where did this budget amendment come from? What's his?
It's a resolution. And
I'm
it's-
sorry, resolution. And what is its source?
Did it come from national or local? National School Board
So it's the
Association.
National School Boards Association resolutions pushed down to the local district, voted on by the local districts, and returned back up to the National Association.
Let me clarify for you, David. North Carolina School Board Association does our North Carolina lobbying for us. We're a member of that association. And the National School Board Association does our lobbying for us in Washington on a national scale. All the school board associations across the country. Whereas North Carolina is specific to North Carolina. NSBA is nationwide, lobbying for every state, every school board association.
And thank you for that clarification. Somewhat in line with other comments, I see it at best as a symbolic gesture. A nice verbal statement, but to what extent it would be effective is not clear to me. I just need to get my brain around the purpose of it and the true effectiveness of it in the next few seconds, actually.
You were right, Mr. Harrison. You were right. Okay, Mr. Phillips, you have your comments and questions.
Yeah, I'm a little conflicted on this because obviously we're all going to have to take a little pain to address our national deficit issue, and that means taking cuts in things that we all value, including education. But I have to agree with Barry that absorbing $400,000 in an exceptional children budget in the middle of a school year when we don't have the opportunity to have allocated funds at the beginning of the year to account for that is just that would be very, very difficult to handle. I mean, if this could be changed so that they give us some advance warning so that we could accommodate it in next year's budget.
The likelihood of it
withstand
being this school year is very unlikely. We're talking next school year.
Oh, okay. So
We're
we
not
may
talking
have
school year.
more opportunity. Well, that lessens my resolve to support this. The only other question I had was whether we wanted to change the date from January 2nd to the beginning of March. But if this is a standard resolution that's being adopted nationwide, then I think we should just stick with the standard text.
Thank you, Mr. Phillips. Are there any other questions, comments, concerns about the sequestration resolution?
Well, remember, the sequestration is automatic cuts, and that really has not been addressed. The proverbial, they've thrown the apple down the road a little bit farther, but I'm not going to use the other one. But it's still there, it's still looming on us, and these are the automatic cuts. No science has been applied to this, and if they're going to do cuts, then they need to do a better job of providing some science behind it rather than forcing it down to the local level and forcing us to jump through hoops. But there is probably room in the budget for them to do what they need to do and ferret out some of the excess that's up there. But I feel like the resolution is a piece of paper. It just shows that we stand behind it. Use some science. Don't just whack things off just because you want to reach an end date.
Thank you, Mr. Shoemaker, for your final comments. Any other questions, comments? Mr. Harrison, you thinking pretty hard down there.
I'm sorry if the steam is coming out of my ears. I'm not mad, no. But well, it begs the question, if the monies were cut, what would our plan B be? Or, I mean, do we have any means of anticipating what we would do with fewer funds in those categories? Help me complete my thought, I suppose.
So with Title I, we thought this was going to happen this past fiscal year, so we held back funds to take care of that. So later in the planning year, we were told this was not going to happen this fiscal year, and so we allocated those funds back to the schools when we were assured that it was not going to happen this fiscal year. So as we'll plan for next fiscal year, that's generally what we do. We hold those funds back. And with Title I, it's not anytime we remove funds from the schools or from education, it's not pleasant. So we do without services to our students and to our children. So essentially that's what we would do, is we would do without services, tutoring services, instructional supplies, technology services, all of those things that we've done without for the last 4 years. It's just you're increasing the problem. So on the EC side, we have traditionally not had cuts in the EC side because you have the federal mandates, you have laws that govern those IEPs, and we've just not had those. So when we talk about, we didn't even talk about cutting federal dollars, EC dollars last year, because we did not think that was going to happen. So it really concerns me when we start talking about cutting EC dollars. I hope we don't go there, but if we do, more than likely they're going to have to change some requirements that we have if they cut our dollars, or we're going to have to supplement locally. There's no way around it.
There's no state equivalent for these programs or these funding sources?
There is, but we're maxed out on those state dollars. So you're funded, we've identified more, there's 12.5% that you can, you're funded for, and we identify higher than that. So we're not funded for the students that we serve already. So we're caught between a rock and a hard place at this point already. So we can't reduce, if we reduce funds, we're going to need to reduce services or supplement locally.
Okay, thank you, David. Everybody else clear? We ready to vote now? All right. Do I have a motion that we approve the sequestration resolution that Ms. Klutz has presented?
So moved.
Carolyn makes the motion. Do I have a second?
Second.
Mr. Shoemaker seconds it. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed?
No.
Okay, the vote carries 6-1 with Mr. Kiger dissenting. Okay, Ms. Klutz, you got your resolution.
Thank you.
Y'all take care of it and get it sent up to wherever it goes. All right, board members, our next and final action item for tonight is the request for a waiver of Board of Education Policy Number 9110, which deals with selection of design firms for capital projects. And Mr. Whitkey's at the podium, and he's going to make his discuss this item with us.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Board members, this request is something that has been sort of begged the issue for some time in terms of how we do business on a day in, day out basis. There are a number of projects that the facilities management department has the responsibility to have designed and bid on an annual basis. Literally, I would say in the neighborhood of 30 projects or more. And many of those projects are below the $250,000 minimum requirement to use an RFQ or request for qualifications mandate. That is a state law. As a policy, the board has said we want to use that selection process for all projects, and we're saying, especially in light of the particular projects that you see on the screen before you, we have a requirement to finish all these projects by December 31st. That means everything is done, everything that was designed, contracted for, constructed, and completed has to be done, and the last dollar paid by December 31st. My concern is it's a lot of work and a lot of design and a lot of construction in a number of different schools in that period of time. And I'm asking for the board to consider allowing us to modify the standard policy for these projects. And what we're suggesting is, and I spoke with Mr. Kiger beforehand about this idea, and that's sort of where my language came from for this request, was really to suggest we have a liaison, what we call a design liaison committee that we work with on a regular basis. And we'd like to suggest that in the case, for example, the cameras, as Kelly Klutz mentioned, the county has said, if you want to bid all those projects together and use that money as a total package, you can do that. You'll probably get better prices that way, and I would tend to agree with them. So the idea is that we would solicit a number of firms to do that. However, when you put together that many large camera projects, not every firm on the face of the earth is going to be able to design that work in the time required. So we're going to be looking at larger, more capable firms to do that. And the number of those firms in our general area are limited. And so we would request a reasonable number of firms to submit proposals, and then I would submit that we would, as a committee, review those and bring to the board our recommendation for hiring the individual firm to do the work. The normal process, the standard RFQ has to be advertised for a period of 2 to 3 weeks, and then the process, we usually give most firms at least 3 weeks to respond on something this size. So, or I should say larger. Typically, on something this size, maybe 2 weeks, but you're still talking about 5 to 6 weeks of time that ideally we wouldn't have to spend. We could condense that to hopefully 2 or 3 weeks, save a little bit of time on this side of it in terms of selecting these firms so we can move forward with the actual design and eventual bidding and construction. And that's what this whole thing is in a nutshell.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Wickey. And board members, I'd like to remind you, I hope that you read 9110, and if you did, you would notice that this policy does have a clause at the bottom of it there where it says the board reserves the right to exempt itself from the process provided in this policy as permitted by the general statute or other applicable statutes, and the superintendent may recommend an exception for particular projects by stating in writing the reasons and circumstances giving rise to that request. And that's basically what Mr. Wickey has done. He has given us the circumstances giving rise to the request. And with that being said, with Mr. Kiger and I believe Ms. Carpenter both are on that committee along with Mr. Wickey, and I'd like to ask Mr. Kiger, because him and I have talked about this just briefly today, and I had mentioned to him that I would ask him to go first on this, and then maybe we can hear from Ms. Carpenter, and then we'll start on my left over here with Mr. Phillips. So, Mr. Kiger, if you'd take the floor at this time.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And just for clarification, the construction subcommittee, Ms. Carpenter is not on, but Mr. Shoemaker has been appointed to.
Okay.
We haven't met yet since he took his seat. Yeah. No. Yeah, you're up.
I didn't think I'm on that one.
Want to be?
I guess we you and I did talk, and I can't remember where I was I was driving and talking. And what you were describing to me sounded fine, and I gave you some positive feedback. I guess through a little bit of research and some trying to understand, I want to make sure there's a couple things that I want to make sure I've got a handle on. And one of them is, I understand the statute talks about being able to do this, picking a firm based on their qualifications, their professional standard level of expertise or whatever, but that a fee can't be part of that negotiation.
Correct.
It only at the end can you then talk about fee. Well, in our policy, and I didn't realize that our policy said this, but it talks about will solicit, and I'm in section B. The superintendent or designee will solicit proposals and provide a list of architects or engineers. I guess, and this may be my question to Mark, when we send that out, are we specifically telling them that this proposal cannot have a fee?
Well, I know the request for proposals we generally do not have a fee component. In other words, we will say we need a new elementary school, roughly this size and dimension, and the proposals that they get are to design a particular school or set of schools without a fee. Okay. Because the statute does set out a two-tier. You're supposed to pick based on qualifications, and then once you've made your selection, you negotiate. That, although that process, just to be clear, can be exempted by the statute. In other words, you've got kind of a two-part statute. The public policy says two things that are then incorporated into our policy. One is you must advertise publicly and let everyone know, hey, we're building a school and these are our general requirements. You're invited to submit. The second piece is then you'll negotiate the fee. The exceptions, though, are if the estimated professional fee is less than $30,000, you can elect not to use that process. That may apply to at least some of these projects. I would expect the design fees would be less than 30,000. Or if there's a particular project and the board at a public meeting states reasons and circumstances why the normal announcement process wouldn't apply, you can exempt any project regardless of size if the board decides we're not going to follow it. So the statute does give you the authority, and that's the statute, that's 143-64.32, the one that's referenced in our policy, basically says you have a right to deviate. Long answer, I'm not sure whether what Mr. Wickey's proposing, still don't think those proposals would have prices,
No,
right?
no, sir.
We would ask for how they would design it. We would pick based on the best proposal, best qualifications, and then negotiate. So I don't think we're going to be seeking pricing at this initial stage. What we are doing that's different than the statute is instead of a public announcement where anybody could submit, we're going to pre-select a handful of design firms we think have the qualifications and invite their proposals as opposed to a public announcement. That is a deviation, and I think that's one that if the expected fee on any of these is more than $30,000, is one the board would have to, at a public meeting tonight, say, we're not going to do a public announcement, instead we're going to hand select a few. You would have to have a formal action to deviate from the normal public announcement process.
Okay, I think I'm following you there, except, I mean, well, is your intention to break them out? Are we going to, if the fee, well, wait a minute. How are we going to go about soliciting the, I guess we'll call it proposal, that's what our policy says. Are we specifically asking for individual proposals for each individual item?
No, sir. My suggestion, Mr. Geiger, is that we would ask for proposals on, in the list I'm looking at, we have 5 camera projects, so we'd ask for a proposal from.
To do 5
for
projects.
For 5 projects. The tennis courts would be those 2 projects together. And then the only other one that we currently are not doing is, that we need a request for a proposal is for the field house construction. The replacement of locks, as you recall, we've purchased, excuse me, got 2 projects mixed up. This replacement project, again, we wouldn't exceed the $30,000 in cost. As a matter of fact, we're pretty much looking to put that proposal out ourselves internally. We don't, in other words, we don't require a separate firm to do that for us. And with the emergency generator wire service, that I believe has already been designed, and we're just simply using those documents to obtain obtain bids for that project.
Okay, you just lost me, because the generator,
Yeah, I'm just saying, that's the list of projects that we received money from the county, I'm sorry. The list that you're looking at on the screen is what we're suggesting.
okay,
We
all
need
right,
approval
I
for.
got, well, okay, you threw me a little curveball.
I'm sorry, excuse me.
Um,
So there's 5 camera projects, there's the 2, and those 5 camera projects, as I said, would be 1 consultant, another consultant for the tennis courts, another consultant, a single consultant for the field house, and then I listed, just so you were aware of it, we had security vestibules at 5 schools that we had in our regular budget. That was not given to us for the county as a separate funding source, but as part of our capital program. And those projects we're in process of awarding to a local firm to do those, to speed that work along. And that fee is well below $30,000.
The one at the very bottom, you're already advanced,
Yes.
okay. Well, I guess, in my personal opinion, I'm okay with the cameras, the tennis courts and I don't know, I don't see how you're going to get, I don't see the need for the waiver on the tennis courts between now and December 30th. I'm not sure that's necessary. And the field house at Robinson, I guess that's a whole different conversation altogether, since we're not sure 358 is going to get us what we need. I'm a little torn there. And I guess I'll just wait for my fellow board members to comment on that one. But for the cameras in security, in light of kind of where we are, that we had started this process prior to the tragedy that happened, but that sort of put laser-like focus on, well, where exactly are we in that process? And so I'm certainly okay with helping speed that up so that we can get that done prior to the the school opening in August. I don't have a problem with that. And it sounds like, from what I understand from Mark, that particular, the way the policy reads, that we're okay statutorily with what we're trying to do. I guess I'm just a little uncomfortable with the projects at the bottom, maybe not legal-wise, but just the way we have them set up and whether we really need to include those or not. And I'll just wait for other comments.
If I could just address if nothing else, the
Mr. Wiki,
tennis courts.
Can you wait just 1 second?
Yes, sir.
Because the cameraman's motioning for me he needs to change the disc back
Yes,
there.
sir.
So you guys go ahead, we'll take a minute here. Okay, Mr. Wiki, you wanted to address Mr. Kiger's comments there.
Yes, sir. I was just going to say on the tennis courts, the critical part about that is we really need to do that work during the summer in order to get them back and ready to go for the fall semester. So it's essential that we get designing that as quickly as possible so we can bid and construct between now and August of this year. That's the reason they're on here.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Wiki, for that. Now, Mr. Shoemaker, you have any comments since you probably hadn't met with the committee yet, have you? Since you just got put on, you're just like a newbie.
No, the committee has not had a chance to convene at this point, but I'm
Okay.
sure that will happen in short order.
Yes.
The only comments that I have about the reconstruction of the tennis courts is really, I think lumping the cameras together is definitely a good move. As far as the tennis courts, there's also seems to be some floating issues with that, and I don't know if we're going to discuss those at a later date with the 6 courts proposed by the Athletic Association there at Concord. But the fact that Northwest only has 4 courts and Central only has 4 courts, so we've got several schools in the same situation as Concord. I don't necessarily disagree with Mr. Kiger on the tennis court projects because the 2 of them could probably float by themselves. But I know that trying to reach the December 31st deadline really means that you've got to have most of your monies paid by December the 10th or have everything pretty much done before that because you have the big Christmas break in there and all, so you really have to have everything almost finished by the end of November if you're going to reach this deadline. So you're really not talking December 31st, you're really talking November 30th, and having done many, many projects on my own, we're really under the gun to get this stuff done. And so I understand the reason for this request to this waiver. I'll let you guys sort out the fees piece. But I didn't see anything about the public notice in this specific policy, so I'm not sure what policy you're quoting, but it's not listed in this policy. I didn't see a thing about public notice in this one.
Right. I guess I would say it's been the history here, at least for me and working with the board, that we do announce it in the newspapers and other journals, and usually give at least a 2 to 3 week turnaround time on that notice.
All right. Well, y'all were talking like it was in this policy, and it's definitely not in this particular document. So that's the only thing I have to say.
Thank you, Mr. Shoemaker. Ms. Carpenter, your comments.
Well, when are we going to discuss this issue of the tennis courts? I mean, we've gotten emails, and I mean, we've heard 6, we've heard 4. My question is, do we have land? I know we don't have money. We've been given enough money for 4. I mean, that's all we've got the money for. And what I'm wanting to know, I don't know where this has been come up with. I mean, I know we've been given money for 4. That's all we got money for. I don't know if there's land for it. I don't know. I mean, I just know that's all we've got money for. Somebody tell me where we're at with this.
Where we're at is we need to hire a consultant. We're going to get a survey done of the property, and we will look at the possibility of what is possible within the area of the existing tennis courts. There is some room at the edges of those courts to expand them. Whether it's sufficient to do more than the 4 that was originally planned, I'm not sure. But that's what we need the professional to look at for us. And we also need the survey just to make sure that we have the right dimensions that we're working within. So we've got a little bit of preliminary work to do before I can report back on anything. But the key is to do the survey work and then to hire the consultant so we have an expert that knows how to lay these out and design them and can give us this information.
I need it.
My question is, who bought this? I mean, did somebody promise them 6? Or, I know they only gave that amount of money. That's where I was wondering all this came up, or did these parents just say, ooh, I want 6? That's my thing, because, we're getting these emails, and I'm sure the other board members did. And I know that all these other schools only have 4. That's where I'm wondering.
No, the newer schools do have 6 courts, but certainly the older schools only have 4. The situation is, and I don't have all the drawings with me or anything tonight, but the existing courts are sort of landlocked at this point. And as I said, there's area around the courts where they exist, and there may be some room, not now, but in the future, to expand the court figure to 6 if we have the right information to show that. We have money to build 4, and that's what we're looking at doing.
Thank you, Ms. Carpenter and Mr. Wicke. Dr. Shepherd has a few comments that he wants to add into this, because obviously he's been emailed on all this stuff too. So.
No, I'm certainly in support of building all that we can for the money that's been allocated. The Facilities Department made the request of the Board of Education to build 4 tennis courts, or to resurface 4 tennis courts at Concord High School. You approved that, or the former board did, and we took that recommendation to the county commissioners, and the county commissioners approved funding to resurface or rebuild 4 tennis courts at Concord High School. After they approved that, it became known to my office that an earlier request had been made to the Facilities and Maintenance Office to build 6 courts. I was not aware of that till after both decisions had been made by both boards. At that point, we know that we have a timeline to address this by December 31st. We also know that we don't have a designated portion on that property at Concord High School that's not, there's no property there that's been identified that's not currently being used for something else. So someone would have to give up in order to receive. So though this sounds like a good idea, it's one that I think have, if we're going to follow the timelines to get this money spent on the right amount of time, I have directed Mr. Whitkey twice now to move forward with building this project as it was designed by or approved by the Board of Education and approved by the county commissioners. So I think the answer to the question is that we are not, we don't have the time, we don't have the money to do anything other than what you've directed us to do already when our commissioners have approved.
Thank you, Dr. Shepherd, for the clarification on that. I knew that we had voted and the commissioners voted, and that's why the specific amount of money has been assigned to these projects. And so, but that being said, Mr. Phillips, we'll pick up with you and come on up to Mr. Walter.
Okay. Setting aside the 4 versus 6, since that's really not the focus of what you're asking for here, I think there are several unique circumstances that justify bypassing the normal procedure. First is, as you pointed out, a significant portion of this is for security-related projects, and given the remembrance ceremony that we had at the beginning of this meeting, I think everyone will understand why we want to streamline that process. Second is that I believe that tennis is a fall sport, and therefore the sooner that we can get those courts built, the sooner they will actually be used at these schools that don't have even courts that they can practice on, much less courts that they can have matches on. Third, this district has had a lot of experience in the last 10 years in using engineering design firms, and I think you probably know which ones are the good ones and will give us good value for the money. It's not like you're picking this stuff out of whim. And so I think all that together says, plus the fact that this is only for the design and engineering, which is what, 10-20% of the total cost. You're not bypassing the normal bidding process for the actual construction. I think that you are well justified in these circumstances.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Phillips. Mr. Harrison.
I trust you.
Okay, Mr. Walter.
So the point is to save about 4 or 5 weeks. That's the goal here.
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Okay, board members, are there any other comments or any other questions in reference this particular item here where Mr. Wickey's asking for a waiver of policy number 9110 to speed up the process? And with that being said, let me just make my comments for whatever it's worth, and it might change the whole way that we're looking at this. As far as the security upgrades, Mr. Wickey, I have no problem with that. You know, like Mr. Kiger said, in light of Newtown, you know, anything we can do to speed up that, I'm with that, no problem. The tennis courts, we need to get that done just as soon as we can, simply because they're inoperable now, and we can get them up and running by the fall of 2013. That'll be a good thing. However, on the field house at J. Robinson, you know, those guys have been waiting on that thing for a very long time. However, I feel like, though, that we're looking at a total of $358,000. And as Ms. Klutz stated earlier, you know, if we don't have enough money that's allocated for that, then obviously, you know, we're not going to do anything until we know we've got the money. So it might require a little fundraising going on there to make up the difference, because the county only gave us $300,000, which is, at the time, we thought $300,000 thereabouts would cover it, but that's been many years ago. Things have advanced since then. So with 300 plus the 58 that they've already collected there, I just don't believe that's going to be enough. And so based on that, I really don't see the urgency of bypassing the policy for the field house, for the simple reason that I feel like it's going to be substantially more than what we're going to have. And I'm not sure that the school system's going to be in a position to make up that difference. So I can't see really, in my own way of seeing it, I just can't see the urgency there, knowing what very potentially could be in front of us. And then the other capital projects here of an emergency nature, I have no problem with that either. Of course, I can go along with everything except the field house. And I know I'm going to get beat up, slapped on, and whatever else, you know, particularly for the J. Robinson parents. And that's not what this is intended for. But I like to see and I like to know where the money's coming from before we commit. And when we waive a policy to do a project like this, then we're putting our necks on the line to make the difference up. And I'm not sure we're able to do that. And I know, Ms. Klutz, this will be putting you on the spot, but, you know, you might want to comment maybe a minute, just a little bit briefly about, you know, in the event that it does go over that, do we have any sources that we could pull from if we needed to make up an extra 50, 60, 75,000?
I would recommend that we not start the project until we have identified the entire funding source. We know how much the project's going to cost us, and not start it until then. Also, one thing I did want to mention is that the county was gracious enough not to hold us until the December 31st deadline on that project. They did hold that project out. So we are okay on that project.
Well, that's good, because, see, I didn't know that. I'm not sure any of the other board members knew that. So with that being said,
What?
you know, are there any other comments? So we have this. I mean, if you want to take this one out, leave it in, whatever, it's not my vote, it's the board's vote. But,
I would make a motion, I guess.
well, let's hear what Mr. Shoemaker has to say, and then we'll call for a motion. Okay, Mr. Shoemaker.
Right now, all we're looking at is waiving the design. And you don't know how much the field house costs. So right now, you're clueless in Cabarrus, to coin a phrase. You don't have a clue how much that's going to cost. So doing a little bit of design work on this would give you an idea of whether this project is feasible or not. If you don't do due diligence and say it's not feasible, then you know, and you just throw it back in, then the commissioners might say, you know, gosh, we gave you some money and you didn't even give us an estimate as to how much it would cost. And so I feel like there's some diligence that has to be done there. And if they want to fess up and and pony up more money because the design came in a little bit higher, then that's what we could go to them with and say, we're never going to initiate the project until we've got a cost. But at least get the design done and have an idea what the cost is, because right now, y'all have admitted you don't know what the cost is. I mean, this is a swag figure that came from who knows what year, all right? That's where I am.
Well, the only thing is, Mr. Shoemaker, is that, you know, to allow, this is the larger of the projects, you know, 300 358, you know, it's one of the larger of the single projects there. And there's not, in my opinion, then again, just my opinion, there's no real need to circumvent that policy to find out what we already know. We know it's going to be more than that. But since we don't have a timetable on the money, it's not going to really matter, whereas on the others, it does. That's the urgency between them and this. There's no urgency on this, whereas they are on the other. But Dr. Shepherd has a comment I think he wants to ask.
I just want to clarify. At one point, they were talking about offering architectural services as part of their in-kind. No, they meaning the parent group at J. Robinson. The design would be a part of in-kind. I would imagine the board would have to do something in terms of exempting the policy at that point. Are you aware of anything?
I've not heard that.
Okay, and that was several years ago when we were first talking. So I would imagine if the incentive is for them to be able to do that kind of work, we would want to bring that idea back to the board, and I would certainly be, interested in hearing that if they were. Is that?
Yeah, I agree, though. I think the board would need to act to exempt if someone's going to provide those services. You'll probably need to do that, as well as obviously get some assurance that the architect's qualified to do the work, since it'll be the school building we're inhabiting.
Yeah, and Mr. Chairman, I just go back briefly to what Mr. Shoemaker said. I think you're right. We need to zero in a little further than what we have now. But to get there, I'm not sure we need to waive a board policy. I think we can go through the normal process for that particular piece, and the rest of it, I'm okay with the rest of it. I guess you talked me in. Jeff talked me into the tennis courts when he reminded me that tennis is a fall sport. So that's a deadline or a milestone that we need to take into account. But as far as the field house goes, maybe that's something that we can meet as a committee to sort of get some design parameters together for what we envision. I got to tell you, I can't believe I'm getting ready to say this on television, but I was in a bathroom at Pinehurst while my son was playing in a golf tournament. And I'm standing there washing my hands and realize it's a CMU wall on a slab with plumbing and literally just a small suspended heater from the ceiling. Very, very cheap, but very warm while I was freezing. We don't need to design the Taj Mahal out there. Right. So, there are ways to build things that can get us what we need without going crazy. So, in any event, I think we maybe need to drive the bus a little bit on the design end instead of after it's designed and we know it's too expensive, then going back and trying to value engineer it. So I think that we're in a little more control of our own destiny at that point.
Thank you, Mr. Kiger, because that's what I've been saying all along. We need to build to the budget. What the budget is, that's what we have, and that's it. Say, you guys, this is it. We build to the budget. But anyway, it's the board's pleasure. So, Mr. Whitkey, you have any other thing you want to add in support of this request, or board members have any other questions? Are we going to be calling for a motion? All right. I don't really know how quite to put the motion, because I think I've got a little bit of difference on both sides. Is there a motion? Let me get back to the original thing here. The original motion is that the superintendent recommends that the Board of Education waive the requirements of Policy 9110 and allow the Facility and Maintenance Department staff to select design firms to do the design and construction documents for all of these projects that were listed. Now, is there a motion that we accept the superintendent's recommendation? That's all of them. Now, if we have a motion and we have a second, we'll vote on that. And if it carries, that's where it'll stay. But if we don't have a motion, it dies for lack of a motion. Then we'll go back and modify the recommendation here, or the motion, to eliminate the J. Robinson Stadium. So, with that being said, with the motion as presented, do I have a motion that we accept that recommendation?
Well, point of clarification, Mr. Chairman, the motion as written here says at the end, construction documents for school security projects on the basis of modified selection process.
Yeah, I see that. That's at the top. I was looking at the bottom, Mr. Phillips, at the very, very bottom, right above where it says the attachments. Do you have that part on there? That's where I was looking at. That's where I was looking at.
Well, why don't
In terms of a parliamentary matter, Mr. Chair, I think, although we have a suggested motion here, the board members should be free to make any motion.
Sure.
You know,
Sure, absolutely, absolutely.
Any motion that you want. So you're not stuck with that. You don't actually have to do that first. If someone wants to put a motion on the table, they can do that. If it gets a second, it gets voted.
That's what I need.
Yeah,
I was just trying to
No,
figure
I
it out
understand
for
it.
both of them.
This
so.
is a suggestion so that you have something to go by if you want to follow staff, but if you want to make your own motion or modify it, any board member can make a motion.
All right, well, let's just go with that. Mr. Phillips, do you
All right,
care
so-
to make the motion?
Yeah, I'll make the motion that the Board of Education waives the requirements of policy 1910 and allow FMD staff to select design firms to do the design and construction documents for the projects listed in the attachment, with the exception of the field house construction project at J.M. Robinson.
Very good. Do I have a second?
Second.
Yes.
I wanted to ask.
Oh, beg pardon.
So you can discuss. We got.
Just key down. That's okay. I just wanted to make sure the way that's worded, Mark, on our, the fee part versus just design, I hate to keep harping on that, but I want to make sure that the motion, that since we're waiving a board policy that we've addressed, that we're doing this, that does not conflict statutorily.
My understanding is what you are, again, I think you could modify the fee section if you wanted to by vote, but I think the proposal that, as I understand the motion, is you're eliminating the need for kind of a public selection. You're also eliminating the need for board. You want staff to now come forward and do a selection on the design forms based on the modified selection process. I guess one thing that would be helpful for my clarification, is the final selection still going to be brought back to the board, or is this a delegation of that selection to this committee? I'm not completely clear on that.
Right. My recommendation is that, staff, if you will, myself and my staff would work, and, we'd come up with the recommendations, run those by our liaison committee, and if the liaison committee is comfortable with those decisions, to move forward at that time. If not, we would then bring it back to the board.
Thank you for that clarification. So the board is saying, in lieu of the normal process where the board would actually vote on a design form, your design firm, you're saying based on the timing, you're giving that authority to the team. So that's a different process. Our process calls for a board vote after they come to you with recommendations, several options. You would interview, discuss, and vote. You're modifying it for that. So I think that's what you're doing for the ones that are listed, except for the field house, as I understand the motion. Does that help you? It doesn't, that group can still say, and I think what's envisioned is not getting fee quotes. You want to get proposals from a handful of selected firms. You're still going to pick the best qualified firm and then negotiate a fee with that firm. So you're not modifying the cost perspective, but you're delegating the normal authority, which would come back to the board, to staff for them to actually make that selection and move forward with these projects. That's how I understand the pending motion.
Okay, thank you, Mark, for that clarification, and I think that's where everybody's at. I think everybody's pretty much clear on it, I believe.
I'm willing to second it, but I think Mr. Harrison has a comment.
Yeah, Mr. Harrison, you have a comment. Go ahead.
Just to ask if we are pulling the field house out of this motion that we're about to vote on, is it appropriate to have a friendly amendment or some other discussion about when to have a field house discussion and a vote or any further action? Because again, that school has waited quite a long time for that facility. We're just, to the outside world, it's procedural, possibly, but I want to make sure we get the field house back on the agenda, discussed, and moved forward. Or should we deal with that separately than this?
No,
this
I can
motion?
assure you that anytime we get money for a project, we're not going to put it on the back burner. The only thing that we're not doing here, Mr. Harrison, is we're not giving the facilities maintenance staff the authority to waive the normal board policy on the J. Robinson Stadium. Everything else we are. Is that right? No, we're clear.
Yes, sir.
Could we?
And you guys are going to stay right on the J. Robinson Stadium. We're going to move right on with normal board policy, do the normal things that we normally do to get the J. Robinson project, at least, the things that we need to make decisions on when to start that project.
Yes, sir.
Okay. All right, now,
I would, just to address David's concern, I would welcome a friendly amendment that added to this, and at the same time move forward with soliciting bids for a design of the J.M. Robinson Field House in accordance with policy 9110, so that you're doing both at the same time. It's just one's got, the others are going to go a little faster because you're bypassing the solicitation process.
Yeah, what he said.
okay.
I think that was a second.
Well, with that being said, Mr. Kiger, is your second his motion? Do you go along with the amended friendly amendment that Mr.
Yes,
Phillips
Mr. Chair, I'm
made?
fine with that.
Okay, we have a motion and we have a second. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Are there any opposed? Motion carries 7-0. Thank you, Mr. Wiki. It was a little long, drawn-out thing, but we very rarely waive policies for things like this, or pretty much anything. 12 years on the board, I've never seen us waive a policy. So these guys, got something done here. All right, with that being said, folks, that's the end of our meeting for tonight. And so we'll be back on the 14th for our business meeting. Hope you all have a good week. Do I have a motion that we adjourn?
Second.
All in favor say aye. Aye. Okay, good night, everyone. See you back on the 14th.